For this week's classic interview, we're going back to something really, really serious. Richard Clarke is the former terrorism sort of advisor to the Bush administration, the George W. Bush administration, who sent this infamous memo about bin Laden poised to attack in August of 2001, which, as we now know, was basically ignored by the Bush administration. And the reason for revisiting this interview now is, as we hear Donald Trump's boisterous and belligerent talk about, I did Miss USA or Miss America, whatever it was, Miss America, I think, in Russia. So I have knowledge of Russia. When we revisit Sarah Palin's comment about you can see Russia from Alaska, so I'm well versed on Russian foreign policy. Let's remember what happens when you have even mildly unqualified people on foreign policy, thinking back to 2001. And then let's extrapolate what would happen if we had someone like Donald Trump at the head of foreign policy in the United States. Disaster, right? So we'll go back to that classic interview with Richard Clarke from 2010. Let's take a listen. Recently, I had the chance to speak with terrorism expert Richard Clarke. We'll play that interview for you now. Richard Clarke is the author of Cyber War, The Next Threat to National Security and What to Do About It. I have the book and I'm holding it up here. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll talk about the book. But first, you're most well known to me, up until I read this book, as the guy whose memo about upcoming attacks just before 9/11 was ignored by Condi Rice. How do you feel today, kind of in retrospect, about how that went?
Well, not very well. I regret a lot what happened during that time frame, and frankly, there were some mistakes made in the Clinton administration as well. But the real problems were in the Bush administration. They wasted the first 9 months of the administration when it came to dealing with the threat from Al-Qaeda. And then, of course, after 9/11, they made it worse by invading Iraq and really exacerbating the terrorist problem by giving a lot of people a reason to hate the United States and to join Al-Qaeda.
Did you feel uncomfortable day to day leading up to your resignation in 2003 with the fact that you had kind of come out and pointedly said, my memo was ignored, this wasn't completely unforeseen? I mean, was it day to day? Was it just not a nice situation for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And the Bush administration was not a great place for anybody to work. And an awful lot of the professionals in national security quit during the first few years of the Bush administration. People like Rand Beers, who's now the Undersecretary of Homeland Security, had been in the government for 25 years, quit rather than be in an administration that was invading Iraq.
When you think back now to 9/11 and that whole period, is your feeling that 9/11 could have been prevented, but not in a hypothetical world, if we had done so many different things intelligence-wise, but just if we had paid more attention to the intelligence we did have, right? Not just saying if everything was different. With what we had, if we had just paid a little more attention.
Well, I think there are two levels to that question. One, could you have prevented Al-Qaeda from being able to mount a major attack at some point? Probably, but then you would have had to really have begun the process a lot earlier. Could you have stopped a specific attack? Yeah, we could have stopped a specific attack if the information that was resident throughout the U.S. government were fused together. If CIA hadn't sat on information for months.
And there's plenty of evidence that they were doing that.
Well, I think the 9/11 Commission is the authoritative source on that, and it certainly comes to that conclusion.
We actually recently spoke with former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura about that 9/11 Commission report. Now, he believes that there was a conspiracy involving the Bush administration to either, allow 9/11 to happen or even were somehow complicit in it. He says his problem with the 9/11 report is there's only one page dedicated to how did these buildings pulverize. I don't subscribe to his particular views, but what's your biggest concern with that 9/11 report?
Well, certainly none of those things. I think if the former Governor Ventura believes those things, he probably believes in that flying saucers are landing on the mall in Washington, too.
Well, I think he does.
I don't doubt he does. No, I think the 9/11 Commission was a very good, very professional piece of work. We can quibble with passages here or there, but I think the overall finding of the commission, and their recommendations were very solid.
Do you believe that there's Republicans and Democrats, it's become a very partisan issue now, talking about, are we safer now than when you wrote that memo in August of 2001? Do you believe that things have changed and we are safer now? And it sounds like such a cliche question, but I can't think of a better person to ask it of than you.
Well, some things have definitely improved, and some things have not. I think in the last 18 months or so, we've made a lot of progress in going after Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda had moved into Pakistan, and the Bush administration didn't do much about that, and did a little toward the end in the last year of the administration. But Obama's really stepped up the pressure with cross-border bombing using the Predator drones at a very high rate. And they've really destroyed a lot of the Al-Qaeda leadership, and they've got Al-Qaeda on the run. Now, that doesn't mean they're still not capable of doing attacks, but I would say Al-Qaeda is probably weaker now than it's ever been.
Dick Cheney has been quoted numerous times as saying that Barack Obama is proactively making decisions that are making the country less safe. I take it you disagree?
Yeah, what Dick Cheney is doing is sort of the political equivalent of a hedge fund. He's buying a bet that there will be a terrorist attack and in the United States, and if there is one, he wants it to benefit him and his party politically. So what he's saying now, in advance of a terrorism attack, is there's going to be a terrorism attack, and it's all going to be Obama's fault, and it's Obama's fault because he's not torturing people. It's the most pandering, partisan, despicable kind of activity that any politician could engage in.
And it takes a lot of imagination to connect all those dots preemptively, does it not?
Yeah, well, it's sort of evil genius kind of imagination, yeah.
Talking about cyber war, and again, the book is Cyber War, The Next Threat to National Security and What to Do About It by Richard Clarke, and I've read a majority of it in the time I've had to prepare for the interview. We had a conspiracy theorist type guy on the show a few months back. His take on cyber war was that the government will be spying on citizens through RFID chips and similar type of stuff. You're taking what I think is a much more intelligent approach, and you're seeing it as a country-to-country issue of national security, right?
Well, that's right. The United States has created military units to fight in cyberspace. The Navy has created the 10th Fleet, which doesn't have ships. The Air Force has created the 24th Air Force, which doesn't have airplanes. And these military units are designed to fight in cyberspace, meaning to destroy things in the physical world by attacking them through the Internet and the control systems that run them. So derail trains, blow up pipelines, bring down power grids. By getting at those things through the Internet and through the control systems that are networked, and everything is controlled through cyberspace these days.
So when my friend says to me he's worried about someone stealing his credit card number through Facebook, you're talking about trains, you're talking about even the electrical grid possibly?
Well, your friend has a legitimate concern because there are cyber criminals out there. But
right.
People have talked about that for a long time. What Rob Kanaki and I are talking about in the book Cyber War is something different. It's about how militaries have now moved into cyberspace, and militaries are planning to fight the next war in cyberspace. And they've done all of that without any public discussion, without any strategy that anybody's ever approved, and without any attempt at international control of these things. So we've sort of let the military run out ahead, and we haven't really thought it out.
What's the worst case scenario possible that could come as a result of a cyber attack? I mean, not to paint an apocalyptic picture, but what could happen?
Well, I think the kinds of systems I mentioned are all things that could be destroyed or damaged. So there can be train derailments, there can be pipelines blown up, the electric power grids can be brought down, and not just brought down for a short period of time, but key components on the power grid could be damaged so that the power grid would be down for weeks. Now, the kind of effect we're having now with the volcano in Iceland grounding airplanes,
right?
An attack could take place on the aviation control systems and ground airplanes for weeks at a time.
Do you think, and I take your warning seriously, especially after the 9/11 memo fiasco, do you think enough attention is being paid to this by the Pentagon and the Department of Defense?
So I think the Pentagon and the Obama administration are doing a lot to defend the Pentagon. But they have not made the fundamental decision that they want to defend the United States. And the United States is a lot more than the Pentagon, a lot more than the government. The things that have to be protected are the banking systems, the transportation systems, and the government has decided for now that it's not going to defend those systems, that we're on our own outside of the government.
Okay, I want to pick that up with you in our members podcast. We've been speaking with the author of Cyber War, The Next Threat to National Security and What to Do About It, Richard Clarke. Thanks for being here today.